What happens when directors who don't specialize in horror decide to make a horror movie? You don't get safe. You don't get the same formula over and over again. You get something different, you know? So today I'm talking about my top horror movies directed by non-horror directors. Filmmakers known for comedy, thrillers, epics, even blockbusters, who stepped into the world of horror and absolutely changed the genre forever. Let's get into it. Near Dark. Before The Hurt Locker, before Zero Dark 30, and hell, even before one of the greatest action movies of all time, Point Break, and before becoming the first woman to win Best Director at the Oscars, Kathryn Bigelow made a vampire movie. And it's not just any vampire movie. It's dusty, nihilistic, darkness-soaked Western horror hybrid, and it absolutely rules. And to be honest with you, it's one of the greatest vampire movies ever made. I don't care what anyone else ever says. Bigelow wasn't known for horror at the time either. She came from an art house territory and short filmmaking. But Near Dark feels raw, dangerous, and in a way that traditional vampire films didn't at the time. Hell, it still doesn't feel like that today. But there's no gothic romance. It's more outlaw apocalypse mixed with a crazy dose of LSD. And what can we say about the bar scene? If you've seen it, it's just chaos. Just pure chaos, and I absolutely love it. Bill Paxton, in my eyes, this is one of his crowning achievements in all the films he's been in. This movie takes Bill Paxton and it dials him up to 200. If you thought he was awesome and the way his character was in Predator 2, this goes way above that. That's how good he is. But this is what happens when an outsider comes into the horror genre and it ignores the entirety of the rulebook. You have a great cast, most who wasn't known really for horror movies, and you get one of the best vampire movies ever put to film. Go watch it. An American Werewolf in London. So at the time of its release, John Landis was known for comedies like Animal House and The Blues Brothers. He was one of the premier comedy directors. So naturally, he made one of the most brutal werewolf transformations ever put on screen, which we have seen this from time and time again, where comedians, they seem to play the villains better than the actual dramatic actors. Point being for myself is Robin Williams. If you've seen 1 Hour Photo, if you've seen Insomnia, you know that Robin Williams plays some of the most just evil and despicable and just skin-crawling villains ever put on screen whenever he was playing the villain. That's because with comedians, they just have a way of, they can see the comedy, but they can also see where they can make fun of it. So that kind of reverse engineers, right, if I want to make fun of that, I'm going to make fun of it. If I want to make it more brutal, this is where I go. And this is the genius of this movie, it really is. It's genuinely funny as well, until it's absolutely not. One of the things which is great about American Werewolf in London is that Landis didn't approach this like a horror purist. He approached it as a storyteller who understands pacing. And that's the contrast that makes the horror hit harder when it does. And you don't get harder hit in this movie than watching the transformation scene. Transformation, excuse me. Every single bit of pain that David is going through, when you see his bones and body shifting, his bones growing longer, his face just distorting into the wolf, that is when it hits you in the gut, and still to this day, it's pretty much unbeaten. That's how good this transformation scene is. But with this is when comedy instinct collides with pure nightmare fuel, and to be honest with you, it's possibly the greatest ever. Before we jump into the top 3, why not give us a like and a cheeky sub if you're enjoying the video. Now let's get into my top 3. The Exorcist. Everyone knows that William Friedkin isn't a horror director. He was just coming off The French Connection, a gritty crime thriller which he won the Oscar for Best Director and also Best Picture for. So naturally, for his next movie, the studios were like, right, let's do another crime thriller, let's get more Oscars. boy were they wrong. William Friedkin decided he wanted to make a horror movie, so when The Exorcist was given to him as an option, he knew exactly how to make it. He wanted it to feel like a gothic horror movie, but shot like a documentary. Clinical, cold, and a matter of fact. And that realism is exactly why it feels so disturbing. There's no stylized fantasy here. It feels like something happening in the next room. That's how good this movie is. But when a non-horror director treats demonic possession like a crime investigation, you get one of the most terrifying films ever made, and in my eyes, it is the single greatest horror movie ever put to film. William Friedkin knew exactly what he was doing, and if you know the stories around how he treated people on set, his actors, then you know that this film was not easy to be made. Hell, Warner Brothers didn't even want to do it after watching the dailies. Not because it was bad, but because they were like, it's too scary. That's how good it is. Psycho. Before Psycho was released, Alfred Hitchcock was known as the master of suspense, not the master of horror. But with the release of Psycho, Alfred Hitchcock did something that a lot of other filmmakers were trying to do around that time, and that was rewriting the DNA of modern horror. He killed the main character early. He made audiences feel complicit in the murders. That's how good it is. And he turned taking a shower into trauma. That's when you know you've got a great thing on your hands. This isn't a supernatural film. This wasn't monsters and cheap jump scares. This was a psychological horror stripped down to nerves and paranoia. And because Hitchcock actually approached it like a thriller, not a horror film, that's why this feels more grounded and more unsettling. And without Psycho, the slasher genre doesn't exist. Period. The Shining. I think a lot of you knew this was going to be number one because, well, Stanley Kubrick is always or mostly known as the greatest director who ever directed a movie. And back in the day, he didn't even make a horror film. He made pieces of cinema that live on in the history books. Spartacus, 2001: Space Odyssey, Barry Lyndon. These movies didn't have any type of horror in them, and the audiences always felt safe. These movies changed what could be possible with cinema. An epic which made other epics push harder to be better. A science fiction movie which made other science fiction just be like, oh my god, what are we doing? And a movie where lighting and precision made people take notice of what can be achieved in camera. And then he made The Shining. Yeah. It feels like nothing any other horror that came before it. A little bit like how The Exorcist was like, oh my god, for 2 hours it is nothing but like an investigation, and then the last 15 or so minutes is just balls to the wall terror and horror. And to be honest with you, The Shining kind of flipped that on its head as well. There's no cheap scares, there's no fast pacing, and to be honest with you, it feels slow in some places. And there's no comforting structure. It's also very clinical, and it suffocates you, even though we're in the Overlook Hotel. Kubrick approached horror like a puzzle, and that's why it still feels like an alien. When you watch it, you get a feeling that something is like always watching you over your shoulder, and you're in your own home. It also doesn't feel like it wants to scare you either, which is absolutely great, but what it does feel like, that it wants to dismantle you and play with your thoughts. And this is why The Shining is one of the greatest horrors ever made by a non-horror director. And that's my list, guys. Horror is at its most interesting when outsiders step into it. They're not following any rules, they're bending them, or even breaking them entirely. This is also why some of the greatest horror movies ever made are made by non-horror directors. The Shining, for example, Psycho, and The Exorcist. So my question to you though, folks, what's your favourite horror film directed by a non-horror director? And if you enjoyed this, check out my horror deep dives on the channel, especially my French extremity ranking. I'll see you in the next one. Sleep well.